Chapter 1: The Harbour. On November 14th, 1912, dawn broke grey as I arrived at the English port before sunrise. Fog mingled with chimney smoke, and the scent of salt and coal filled the air. A leather bag and a thick coat were all I carried. It was neither flight nor adventure that brought me there, only a necessary relocation, encouraged by the promise of a direct voyage south. The ship was not the largest in the harbour, yet it commanded respect. Its dark hull and firm lines conveyed solidity. The name painted upon it seemed recently retouched, as though concealing another beneath. Around me unfolded the usual chaos of departure: hurried farewells, luggage passing from hand to hand, workers shouting orders. Some passengers displayed enthusiasm, others carried an anxiety they struggled to conceal. I boarded without drama. After a brief inspection of my documents, an officer directed me to my section. The corridors creaked beneath my boots. The interior proved simple yet functional. Leaving my bag in the small cabin, fitted with a bunk and a narrow porthole overlooking the dock, I returned to the deck. When the engines vibrated and the ropes were cast off, the true beginning of the journey revealed itself. The coastline slowly receded. No sharp nostalgia surfaced, only a deeper unease, a blend of uncertainty and expectation. Nearby, passengers spoke confidently of the captain's experience and the safety of the crossing. On the bridge, he stood firm, eyes fixed upon the horizon. The city faded into fog behind us. Leaning against the railing, I watched as the Atlantic opened ahead. I did not yet know that the course we followed was not precisely the one marked on the maps. Chapter 2: The Woman Who Was Not From Here. The first 3 days of navigation passed with apparent normality. The sea was relatively calm, the cold gradually intensified, and the passengers began recognizing one another in the dining rooms and during walks on deck. Yet something did not quite fit. I was not particularly sociable, but I was observant, and I noticed that the crew operated with almost mechanical precision. No jokes, no arguments, no carelessness. It was excessive efficiency, unnatural. One afternoon, I also noticed something unsettling about the ship's course. I am no expert in navigation, but my intuition told me the direction did not match what had been announced to us. I mentioned it to a man who had served in the Navy. He responded evasively, assuring me the captain knew what he was doing, though his tone conveyed no real confidence. That night I remained longer on deck, and that was when I saw her. A woman I did not recognize from any corridor or dining room. She stood alone, steady against the freezing wind, gazing at the horizon with a strange serenity. Her clothing was austere, and her presence distinct from the rest of the passengers. I approached her and, attempting to start a conversation about the weather, she replied that it was not the weather that was changing, but the direction. Her words unsettled me because they aligned with my own suspicion. She spoke with an accent difficult to place and claimed not to travel by common routes. When I asked where she was from, she answered that she was not from these lands, and that she came from a place we did not know, or had been made to forget. She implied that routes existed that did not appear on official maps, and that this was not an ordinary commercial voyage. She assured me that some believed we were heading toward the south of America, but others knew we were not. She said she had come precisely because she knew the destination was different. She suggested I observe the crew more closely, and ended the conversation without explaining who she truly was. When I tried to follow her, she had already disappeared. That night I did not sleep. Her words intertwined with my own doubts, and from then on I began to ask myself insistently where we were truly headed and what kind of journey I had boarded without realizing it. Chapter 3: Uncharted Course. The fourth day dawned with a cold that did not correspond to the month of November. It was not the usual Atlantic cold. It cut through the skin as if we had descended much farther south than expected. Frost covered the deck and thick vapor escaped from our mouths. Early in the morning I searched again for the mysterious woman, convinced she knew more than anyone on board. But no one seemed to truly know her. Some passengers vaguely remembered a solitary lady. Others denied ever having seen her. Sky seemed lower, the sea had taken on a metallic tone, and the sense of deviation grew clearer. I tried to calculate the position of the sun. Something did not align. Whispers began to spread. A former sailor expressed his concern about the cold and about the officers' silence, as they avoided informing us of our location. The captain did not appear, and there were no formal announcements. Everything functioned with apparent normality: meals, schedules, bells, yet no one said anything. At noon, the ship entered a rougher current. A young man attempted to demand explanations at the bridge and was firmly restrained. "You are exactly where you need to be," an officer said, a phrase that proved more disturbing than reassuring. From the stern I saw the first blocks of ice floating in the water, at first small, then more numerous. We were not on the route toward America. The course was different. A sailor avoided giving a clear answer and ordered me back inside. By afternoon the ice multiplied, and fear was no longer concealed among the passengers. Finally, a group intercepted the captain. He admitted they had adjusted the course towards safer waters, but without specifying where. His words did not calm us. They confirmed our suspicions. That night, the ship advanced more slowly, and the creaking of the hull became evident. I returned to the deck despite the cold. There she was again, watching the ice blocks that were now brushing against the wood. She confirmed that she knew we were not heading toward the announced destination. She said we were traveling to a place that did not appear on current maps, that some routes are not announced, they are simply executed. A dull sound resonated through the hull. I looked at the dark ocean, now more frontier than path. The ice was no longer an accident of the sea. It was the sign that we had crossed a boundary. Chapter 4: The Sinking. The impact was not a brutal collision, but a deep shudder that ran through the ship from end to end. I felt the vibration in my hands resting on the railing. I saw no block of ice strike the hull directly, and yet something had broken within the vessel's entrails. A second sound, more metallic and tearing, confirmed what I feared. We were sinking. The first screams rose from the lower decks. Water was coming in. I tried to go down, but the sailors urgently blocked the way. The tilt increased, the wind intensified, and chaos began to spread like fire. In the midst of the disorder, I remembered my parents for a brief instant, as if my mind were seeking refuge in something warm before the end. I looked for the woman and found her on deck, calm before the horizon. I asked her if she had known this would happen. She answered sadly that she had not, that none of this was meant to occur. Then the ship suffered a brutal rupture. Darkness enveloped us. Water burst in without restraint, and panic finally exploded. There were few lifeboats, not enough for everyone. Order vanished. I saw people fall into the freezing ocean, heard pleas and overlapping commands. The ship gave way faster than any simple collision with ice could explain. I tried to return to my cabin, but the corridors were already flooded. The structure groaned like paper. A smokestack tilted, and the bow began to plunge violently. I found a lifeboat tangled in ropes and shouted for others to see it. Some managed to board it amid the chaos. In the final seconds, when everything seemed lost, I felt a brutal shove from behind and fell overboard. I expected the blow of icy water, but my body landed inside a small empty boat. I did not know who pushed me or how I ended up there. I rowed desperately as the ship rose at an impossible angle before breaking apart in silence, as if an invisible force had split it in two. The stern lifted for eternal seconds before disappearing beneath the ocean. The sea roared, and then there was a shattering void. The storm unleashed its fury. My small boat was dragged by currents that seemed to have a will of their own. I lost all sight of other vessels. I was left alone, adrift beneath a starless sky, with the echo of the shipwreck still vibrating in my mind. For hours I struggled against the cold and the waves. When the storm finally began to subside, I lifted my eyes and saw, far in the distance, something white and continuous. They were not scattered fragments of ice. It was a long, brilliant, imposing line, a white wall rising before me. Chapter 5: The Continuous Ice Barrier. Dawn brought no relief. Surviving the sinking did not grant me peace. It merely left me breathing. My body functioned on instinct, blocking memories to avoid breaking. The sea after the storm lay in unsettling silence, as if it had never devoured an entire ship. That was when I saw it clearly. An endless white wall rising from the ocean, a vertical barrier that seemed to divide the world in two. They were not scattered blocks. It was a continuous wall of ice stretching until it vanished into the horizon. I tried to locate the sun, to understand where I was, but something in the light felt different. I did not believe we had sailed far enough south to encounter such a thing. Yet there it was, and a steady current began to pull my small boat toward it, with an impossible constancy I could not resist. As I approached, I noticed the wall was not uniform. There were dark sections, deep cracks, bluish cavities. I spotted a narrow fissure, a passage that looked more like a scar than a natural formation. I had no choice. Without water or food, I could not remain adrift. I allowed the current to carry me toward that opening. The corridor was narrow and silent. The ice nearly brushed the boat. The temperature dropped even further. There was no wind, no birds, no sound at all, only the soft friction of water against ice. And then suddenly the tunnel opened. The landscape changed completely. The sea was clearer, calm, almost motionless. The sky held a different tone, cleaner somehow. The wall remained behind me. Before me there was no ice, but an island covered in unfamiliar vegetation. I advanced for hours in extreme exhaustion until the boat struck land. It was real, sand, trees, gentle elevations. I dragged myself ashore and pulled the boat as far in as I could. The sand was warm. The air was different. I moved into the vegetation. I found red fruits, and despite my hesitation, I ate them. The taste was intense and sweet. I sat against the trunk of a massive tree, and fatigue overcame me. I awoke to distant voices, a strange chant. I walked between the trees, and the forest opened to reveal something impossible, a city. White towers of perfect geometry, wide pathways, structures reflecting light with an almost artificial purity. Strange figures moved between the paths and the edge of the forest. I felt that the world I had known had definitively fractured. It did not seem accidental that I had arrived there. The currents had guided me, and as I observed that impossible city beyond the wall of ice, I could only ask in a low voice, "Where am I really?" Chapter 6. The Eyes That Do Not Blink. It took me several minutes to accept that what I was seeing was not an illusion brought on by exhaustion. Before me rose an impossible city, beyond the edge of the forest. Its white towers reflected the light in an almost organic way. There was no smoke, no cables, no visible signs of industry. Only silence and a distant chant that seemed to harmonize with the air itself. Figures walked along wide paths with unsettling precision. At first glance they appeared human, but the way they moved was not entirely so. I hid among the bushes, watching. Fatigue consumed me, yet astonishment kept me awake. One of them stopped and turned his head exactly toward where I was concealed. His eyes shone from within, an intense green impossible to ignore. Two others joined him, one with a reddish hue, the other bluish. All shared that deep luminosity. Their faces and bodies were covered by dark masks. They carried large backpacks on their backs. I stepped partially out of the forest and raised my hands to show I was not a threat. I explained that my ship had sunk and that I needed help. There was no visible reaction. They did not understand my words. They exchanged harmonic sounds among themselves, a form of communication that did not belong to any known language. Then I felt a slight pressure at my temple, as if something invisible were examining my interior. It was not pain, but neither was it natural. I had the strange sensation of being evaluated. Not physically, but at a deeper level. Without gesture or explanation, they moved aside from the path, leaving the way toward the city open. They did not escort me or follow me. They simply allowed me to proceed. I walked toward the towers with my strength nearly spent. The ground was surprisingly firm and polished. As I approached, I observed seamless surfaces, precise curves, translucent openings emitting light from within. More figures appeared along the way. All watched me, and as I drew near, they stepped aside. For the first time since the sinking, I understood something unsettling. I had not arrived there by chance. I had crossed a boundary. The shipwreck no longer seemed a simple maritime accident, but the threshold to something that existed beyond the known world. Chapter 7: The Inner Gate. I advanced toward the heart of the city, feeling that with every step I was moving definitively away from the world I had known. The towers were not ordinary constructions. They seemed like living organisms, interconnected by suspended bridges without visible supports. There were no thick columns or exposed beams. Everything was integrated into a structural continuity impossible for the architecture I was familiar with. I heard no engines or machinery, and yet everything operated with precision. The gardens were perfectly maintained without anyone appearing to tend them. At the center, a gray wall surrounded the main core. It was not defensive in the traditional sense. It was a deliberate barrier, protecting something deeper. I approached the only visible opening, a large door made of the same organic material as the towers, traced with patterns I could not decipher. I felt real fear, a fear different from that of the ocean or the ice. I placed my hand on the surface. It was warm, as if it possessed a life of its own. The door opened effortlessly. On the other side appeared an imposing figure, nearly 3 meters tall, dressed in an orange robe. His face was not concealed. His gaze was conscious, analytical, different from that of the beings outside. When he spoke, he did so in correct but unusual English, learned through logic rather than habit. He told me I did not belong to that territory. Desperately, I explained that my ship had sunk and that I did not know where I was. He responded with a single word, Kether, and added that there were no countries there. Exhaustion overtook me. I asked for water and food. He evaluated my condition with almost clinical precision and stated that I required immediate stabilization. Then he gave a simple instruction: enter. I crossed the threshold. The instant I did, the pressure in my head vanished. The air was purer, the temperature stable. The door closed behind me without a sound. I understood then that the island was not merely a hidden territory, but the center of an entire system, and I had just entered its core without yet understanding the consequences. Chapter 8: Kahluze-Ki. As soon as I crossed the wall, my strength began to fail. The tall being who had received me, imposing, serene, observed me with clinical attention. He told me my nervous system was in overload and that I should not attempt to understand anything yet. I needed stability. He led me through white corridors without visible lamps, illuminated from within the structure itself. Everything seemed molded from a single piece. Other figures watched us in silence. I thought I heard one murmur: "He has finally arrived." We entered a circular chamber. At the center stood a vessel containing a clear liquid with silver flashes. He instructed me to drink. I hesitated briefly, but thirst prevailed. The effect was immediate, not euphoria, but clarity. The trembling ceased, the pressure in my head disappeared, and my breathing steadied. The being introduced himself as Kahluze-Ki, sentinel of the boundaries in Kether. He said I had crossed a threshold. He mentioned that the walls were not mere natural formations, but limits of jurisdiction. When I asked whose, he replied, of the cycles. I did not understand. I told him my ship had departed toward America and ended in extreme ice before sinking. Then he said something that left me breathless. The route had not deviated by accident. It had been redirected, not by us. He showed me luminous projections on the wall, maritime routes, currents, points representing vessels. I clearly saw the trajectory of my ship. It began westward and then curved southward in an impossible arc. It was not the path to America. Someone had altered the course. When I asked who possessed such power, he responded that in the known lands, power is concentrated in structures invisible to the majority. Then, with absolute serenity, he stated that the objective had been to kill all the passengers. I remembered the woman on the ship, her words, her gaze. Kahluze-Ki implied that I was beginning to connect the events. Finally, he revealed who they were, the Ancestrales Kether. They came from the same continents I knew but did not belong to the current cycle, rather to a previous one. I had not arrived at a lost island. I had crossed a frontier into another civilization, beyond the known map. I understood then that the sinking had not been a simple maritime accident, and that my survival had not been one either. Chapter 9. The harsh reality of the world I did not know. Once again I began to falter. I could barely remain standing. The liquid the giant had given me still coursed through my body like warm fire, repairing invisible fibers, calming the tremor, restoring color to my face. So the being beside him told me, but clearly I was not fully recovered. I looked at the nearly 3-meter tall figure and asked, "And those beings on the path who were watching me with those enormous backpacks?" The giant studied me for a long moment. "Strange visitor, do you wish to know everything at once, or shall we go step by step each day?" "Choose the second option," said another being observing from behind as a friendly recommendation. "All at once," I replied without thinking. "Please." The giant inclined his head slightly. The other being placed his hands over his head, as if unwilling to witness what was coming. "Are you certain it is not advisable?" "Yes, please," I insisted. "Very well, but you will not be able to hold it all." The being behind activated a blue screen and programmed something. The giant began to speak while thousands of images appeared in the background. "You are now beyond the first boundary dome. The walls you crossed are not only the edge of the world from which you come, but also the edge of imposed perception, of time and of your timeline. I refer to the new humanity. The towers you observed function in various ways, but we can simplify. They are nodes, emitting certain frequencies for different tasks. The beings with backpacks do not carry objects. They carry fields and analyze the environment, detecting toxins to purify the zone. Some entities, such as the Greys of Orion or the Etamines of Draco, cross this region with piloted craft and drones to contaminate it. You do not come from a distant planet. You come from a sector that has been fully administered for a very long time. The planets you were told lie at incredible distances in the skies are actually located here, beyond the natural and artificial boundaries. The sky you knew is not sky. It is projection, a simulation carried out with advanced technology you surely do not fully comprehend. The stars you see above your native lands are not far away. They are part of the same dome, using what is known as the invisible dome projector. You were not taught to look upward to expand yourself, but to diminish yourself, to feel smaller and more insignificant each day. The idea of a universe was installed so you would forget the horizontal map. You do not live on a lost sphere, you live within a stratified system of domes. There are 178 principal environments beneath a greater membrane, the Great Dome. There have been 8 humanities so far. Only the first was entirely free and only for a brief period. Humanity was created by 5 masters whose identities do not appear in any custodial archive or official record of your native lands. The colonizers could not penetrate the celestial lands, and so they intervened in the human design and never abandoned it, as they did in other dome worlds. Each reset was not natural. They are programmed. 1728 was not a random catastrophe, it was an operation. In 1729, repopulation began with many 7-month-old infants, distributed across territories previously emptied under different attacks and a great mud flood. Memory was fragmented and almost entirely erased. Genealogy was rewritten, cartography was replaced. A second invisible ceiling was installed, the mental ceiling. The noise you hear in your mind is not pure thought, it is imposed interference. It was implanted. The gland known as the pineal, which once connected to the source, was atrophied and only partially replaced. Progress was redefined as escape toward the unreachable, while the edges were turned into myth. The climate around them was modified to make them inaccessible or extremely difficult to reach. War was used as partial reset. Portable money replaced the connection to the land, substituting the purest bond. It became a measure. The custodians are not gods, nor are the Anunnaki the creators of humanity, though they did construct the pyramids. Together with the Greys, the Etamines, and other beings, they are parasitic administrators of cycles. They colonized approximately 88% of the known environments of the entire Great Dome. They penetrated domes other races never crossed. They attempted to pass into the celestial lands and their bodies disintegrated. They created matter transfer portals still in use today, though some are abandoned and dangerous. Many remain active beneath your continents. Some races were used as experiments, others vanished without record, for example, on Mars. There exists a second Earth, the land of the clones. Entire civilizations were replicated there. Full lineages were cloned with implanted memories and are now used as intermediaries between colonizers and the new humanity, the loyal families. Through them, ideologies were programmed and futures rehearsed. They called it social simulation. Mars is not a red planet, but a place resembling a zoo of different races and creatures where experiments are conducted. A human colony from Earth has existed there for many years. The custodial lands are not rumor. They exist. They are centers of genetic and environmental engineering. The custodians manipulated climate, cycles, and possibly longevity. Human lifespan was deliberately shortened. In previous cycles, you lived 3 times longer by your measure. Giants are not myth. Some groups descended beneath the surface during the last reset and created internal cities such as Nushara. Nether Sophia is an important underground city that was not destroyed but sealed. Not long ago, it was learned that many generations of giants originate from an external great dome known as the Dome of the Titans. The lake beneath the lower dome connects at certain points to the depth of the ocean. Great Tartaria did not fall by decadence. It was erased from history and maps because it was considered dangerous to the new humanity. Official documents were selected and rewritten under a strict system. The tall doors were not ornamental, they were proportional to us, the giants and giant humans of Great Tartaria. The First War of Asgard does not appear in the history of the new humanity. The Pleiadians are not saviors. They signed ambiguous, complex, and debatable pacts. Many desire human liberation, but they carry Anunnaki interference, complicating the matter. It is possible the continents you know will be intervened again to introduce small groups of Pleiadians in the near future of your time. The civilizations you call extraterrestrial are not outside. They are laterally displaced, horizontally, toward what you know as the South Pole. The celestial lands remain inaccessible to the colonizers. Humanity was designed, embodied physically, to prevent their entry. The neshama, the human soul, does not belong to the system, but to the source itself. Death is not an end, it is transit beyond the administered field, though return through reincarnation is possible. The cycle does not break easily. We have infiltrators in your lands. Several containment protocols are prepared in case of massive escapes. If the mental noise were to cease simultaneously in millions, the system would collapse. And finally, I almost forgot, there are independent environments, uncharted islands. Some civilizations were not reset, others await it, unfortunately. And as I said before, there is a humanity that still does not remember who it once was. Lately, we are not at ease regarding the resets, because it is known that the colonizers intend to generate a reset in this zone as well. When the giant uttered the final word, my eyes rolled back, and I collapsed once more into unconsciousness.